Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going deep on ISO.
Ooh, nice.
It's something that I think pretty much every photographer at some point or another kind of struggles with a little bit.
Yeah.
You're in low light, you're trying to get a shot, maybe you're in a cool jazz club or something like that, and you can't quite get it. The photos come out too grainy. We've all been there.
It's a really common problem.
So I've got our expert here to help break this all down, explain what ISO is, how it works, and how you can use it creatively so you're not just, kind of like crossing your fingers when you're in low light.
Yeah, absolutely. And, it really starts with understanding kind of how your camera sees in different lighting conditions.
Okay, so let's start with that. I see articles and stuff, they always mention the ISO scale, digital noise, things like that. It can all feel a little bit technical for people, I think, sometimes.
Yeah, for sure. But it's actually pretty intuitive, I think, once you break it down a little bit. Like you're saying, like, remember those those concert photos that maybe come out a little grainy?
Yeah.
That's where understanding ISO, basically how sensitive your camera is to light, is really important.
So almost like turning up a microphone if you're trying to record quieter sounds.
Exactly. So like a higher ISO means your camera sensor is more sensitive to light. Just like, our ears are more sensitive to sound when we're in a quiet room. And so you can think of that ISO scale almost like a volume knob. So like a lower number, something like ISO 100, that's going to be good for bright sunny days. You've got plenty of light. But when you're shooting in low light,
Got to crank up that volume, or the ISO, I should say.
Exactly. You can go to 800, 1600, even higher, depending on how dark it is.
Okay. So this is starting to make a lot more sense. But I have to ask, like, if we're cranking up the ISO to help our camera see better in the dark, is there a downside
Right.
to that?
Yeah. So that's where the concept of digital noise comes in. And essentially, when you increase that ISO, you're amplifying the signal from your sensor.
So, like, if you think about it, like boosting a weak radio signal, you might be able to hear the music better, but you're also going to get more of that static, that interference.
Yeah, that's a really great way to think about it. And so in photography, that static is what we call noise. So that's that graininess. Sometimes you get like kind of colorful dots almost. They can make your pictures look less sharp.
Right. Okay. So more sensitivity, but then you have this trade-off of the noise potentially. Is that why sometimes I feel like, I've bumped up the ISO, I'm in a low light situation, but the photo still looks kind of, I don't know, just not great?
Yeah, it's definitely a possibility. And, another thing is that not all cameras are created equal when it comes to this.
Yeah.
Just like, some microphones, they just pick up more static than others.
Right.
And it's the same thing with cameras and their sensors.
So how do I know, like, where that sweet spot is for my camera? How high can I go with the ISO before I start to get too much of that noise?
Yeah, so the best way to really figure that out is to just experiment. And actually, our source material had a cool little exercise for doing just that.
Ooh, I like it. What is it?
So basically, it's all about kind of finding your camera's limits. So grab your camera, head to a dimly lit room,
Okay.
like maybe your living room at night with just a lamp on or something. And
Setting the mood.
exactly. Set your camera to its highest ISO setting. So whatever that is, could be 3200, 6400, whatever it is, and take a picture.
Okay.
Then lower the ISO one stop, so basically cutting the sensitivity in half, and take another picture.
Yeah.
Just keep doing that, going all the way down the ISO scale until you reach like your camera's base ISO.
So if my camera goes up to 3200, I would take one at 3200, then 1600, 800, and so on.
Exactly. And then once you've got those photos, look at them side by side, and you'll start to see like, okay, at this point, the noise is really starting to get noticeable in the images. And that'll help you figure out, like, for different lighting situations, okay, this is kind of the sweet spot for my camera.
That is such a good tip. I am so doing that later. It's funny. I think for a long time, I thought of ISO as something that I only really needed to, like, mess with if I was in low light. Like, it was kind of a last resort.
Right.
If I couldn't get the shot otherwise.
Yeah, it's definitely a common misconception. But the truth is, it's way more versatile than that. Like, going back to what we were talking about with the stops, and how each stop on that ISO scale doubles or halves the light sensitivity.
Right, like we're adding windows or taking them away to control how much light's coming into a room.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so you can use that to your advantage even when you're not struggling with low light.
Okay, now you're really blowing my mind here a little bit. So,
Okay.
like, give me an example. When else would I be using this?
Okay, so let's say you're photographing, I don't know, like a beautiful waterfall
Okay.
on a sunny day, and you want to capture that silky, smooth water effect.
Yeah, like that really dreamy, ethereal look.
Exactly. So you would use a slow shutter speed for that? Like we're talking maybe even a few seconds long.
Okay.
But here's the thing. On a bright, sunny day, if you use a shutter speed that's slow, you're letting in way too much light.
Right.
And your picture's just going to be completely overexposed.
Yeah, it's going to be blown out. So how do you compensate for that then, if you still want that slow shutter speed?
That's where the ISO comes in. So by lowering your ISO, you're essentially telling your camera to be less sensitive to the light.
Oh, okay.
It's almost like putting sunglasses on your sensor.
So even though it's bright, you're using a lower ISO to balance out the fact that you've got that long exposure.
Exactly. So it's all about kind of finding that balance between your shutter speed, your aperture, and your ISO to get the exact creative effect that you want.
Wow, okay. I'm seeing ISO in a whole new light now. No pun
It
intended.
really is. It's like once you start understanding how it all works together,
Yeah.
it just opens up all these possibilities.
Yeah, it's like, I don't know, it's like learning this secret language
Right.
that you can now speak to your camera. Like, all right, camera, I need you to be a little more sensitive here, or let's tone it down on the sensitivity for this one.
Exactly. Exactly. And like any language, the more you practice it, the more fluent you become.
Right, for
Right.
sure, for sure. So for our listeners who are ready to get out there and start speaking ISO to their cameras,
Right.
what are some of the key things to remember?
Okay, so key takeaway.
Yeah.
Remember ISO. Think of it like that volume knob
Yeah.
for your camera's sensitivity to light. Low ISO, bright situations, you're good to go. High ISO, low light, that's where it really comes in handy.
But, and like we talked about, if you crank that volume up too high, you might get some of that extra noise.
You might get
Yeah.
some noise, exactly.
Yeah.
That's where knowing your camera, doing those tests, figuring out what that sweet spot is.
Yeah, that little exercise, I think, is going to help so many people.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely.
Hmm.
And then I think the biggest takeaway is just don't be afraid to experiment. Like, it's not just for those dark situations. You can use it in all kinds of lighting to get different creative effects.
Yeah, I think we spent so long thinking of it as this one-trick pony, oh, the photo's too dark, I guess I'll try bumping up the ISO.
Right, right.
But it can do so much more. This has been awesome. I feel like ISO just clicked for me in a way it hasn't before.
Awesome.
So thank you. Thank you for breaking that all down.
My pleasure. It's been fun.
And to all of our listeners, go out there, get your cameras, experiment with ISO. We'll see you in the next deep dive.